Good morning. Welcome to the Light on Suitability podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Comeau, with special guest host, co host, Joe Haytas, and our special guest, co host, Michael Gawlik. And we're here to talk some more about Joe's book. We've been talking about it, where we've been talking about his book, 36 Strategies of Suitability. You can sort of see it there in the corner of his screen. And today we were going to start talking about strategy 13, writing the letter of remorse. I just wanted to say that before we came on, we were talking about, I was giving, I don't know what you call it, praise or commendability, acknowledgement, the words are escaping me, to Michael about, Joe and I were talking about having to drive to the prison and did we want to do that? And Michael was saying, well, I'm about to start going back. And then we mentioned that the fact of the matter is, even if Michael hadn't been granted parole, he would have been okay. And I think that's a big difference between a person who's truly ready for parole and someone who's just going to go through the motions and hope to pass the test type of thing for the Board of Parole hearings. And that is, you're waking up with yourself and you're bringing your best self forward. So he was commenting on what I had said, and then I thought, well, I should start the stream. But I think this is it's the reason why I wanted to start with this, and then I'll get back to the book, is the fact that remorse is part of making amends. And we're constantly going back to these 12 steps. Making amends is steps 8, 9, 10, 12, right? It's all of these things. 1, it really is everything. But most importantly, the living amends, the direct amends, the indirect amends, and that, of course, lends itself to what he had just said, is I'm going to go back and give. And if I didn't get granted, I'd still be in there giving back. I would be sharing, facilitating, mentoring, trying to guide people in the right direction. So I'm going to just start with that. What Michael had started to comment on what I had said about that. And I said, well, we'll start the podcast. And we'll start it there, and then we'll jump back to the book. So take it away, Michael.
Well, I think the important thing for me is when I first came to prison, I'd committed myself to dying in prison. There was really no hope for lifers to ever get out. The governor at the time, I believe it was Gray Davis, his policy was the only way a lifer paroles is in a pine box. And early on, I'd given up hope. And I lived that way for quite a few years. And it's just no way to live. I mean, it didn't give me any reason to want to change. And so I lived my life that way. And, it was the first step in that change was an old guy named Tex pulled me aside and just kind of jerked a knot in my head and set me on the right path. And, I thank the old guy for that. And sad to say, Tex died in prison quite a few years ago. But he helped a lot of people like me pull their heads out. And then I decided, you know what? I'm tired of this. I'm not doing it anymore. So I started changing. Back when doing self-help wasn't cool. Back when self-help, in all honesty, was dangerous. Because the mainline politics on the yard, especially for the white guys, didn't allow us to go to self-help groups. The only one we were allowed to go to was the AANA class, because that's where everybody met to pass drugs off to each other from building to building. But I started doing self-help books, getting stuff from the library, started doing correspondence, and then finally I got off the level 4 and found my way to it was still level 4, but it was the honor yard at Lancaster when they just started that up. I'd been down a few years by that point. And, I started seeing the chance to change and slowly taking it, but I got to the point to where this life just wasn't a life. And so I committed to changing myself. And I worked hard. I mean, there were blood, sweat, and tears behind every ounce of change I've made. And when I finally got to the point to where I was starting to be happy with myself, I felt the need to give that back. And that continues today. With all the facilitation of groups I've done, with starting groups, with teaching men, helping them through their high school and college. There's just something uplifting about it. Something that was free. I was no longer a guy sitting here in prison, just rotting away. I was a guy helping people change their lives. And every one of them that walked out that gate took a little piece of me with them. So I was free long before the board granted me freedom. And the only way I achieved that was through giving back, through making amends, and getting onto the subject we're getting on today, actually learning what remorse was and embracing it. And here I am today. I'm getting ready to start a new job with an organization called CEO, Centers for Employment Opportunities here in Los Angeles. They're pairing us with Caltrans, so I'm going to be doing that for a while. And life it's outstanding. There's so much that we have to offer, each and every one of us. So many lived experiences. That's what's going to set all of us free. Even if you're out here, if you're in prison, it doesn't matter. Embrace what you have to share. Embrace giving, embrace kindness, embrace growth. And with all that, it doesn't matter where you are, you will be free.
Did you have anything to add to that, Joe, before I start talking about the book?
Well, actually, this is related to everything, whether it's the book or not. Yeah, Michael has some real words of wisdom there. How the first chapter talks about, being free and thinking free. I think Michael just hit on, hit on a big part of that. You got to be free in your mind first before it manifests in reality. He talked about each one of us finding what we have to share and offer others, and then doing that and giving it to others. And like you said, it's free, and it's one of the greatest feelings is helping others and making amends. And that says so much. And like you said, he'd be good with it. He wouldn't like it, but he'd be okay if he had to stay or if he got to go. So to me, that shows internally you have a sense of freedom already, because you have that sense of purpose, of using your unique skills to help others in whichever way you can. And by starting right now, not waiting until your release date, but right now, starting wherever you're at, God will take you for it, where He'll meet you wherever you're at, and use you, and you have to do your part in that as well. And Michael said it perfectly. So that's my take on what Michael said. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. And just one more thing,
Mm-hmm.
just as long as you're drawing breath, it's never too late to start.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Okay, the meeting's done. No, I'm just joking. No. I want to go. Let's go to the chapter. It's a good chapter, a necessary chapter. So, Letter of Remorse. Now, just so if any of my clients' family members are listening, I do have a different take on letters of remorse. I like my clients to separate them out. Michael knows this. He's been through this exercise with me. I like them to be separated. The reason why I like to separate the accountability statement from the victim impact, I like those to be together. And I like the remorse statement to talk about amends. Why? There's nothing wrong with combining them. And Joe's philosophy is pretty much the majority philosophy. However, I find that some of my clients are real heavy on the I statements. I'm this, I'm changing, I'm great, I'm sorry, I have this amount of insight and blah, blah, blah. And a little light on the victim statements, meaning your accountability, your understanding of victim impact. So I really use, number one, the statement of accountability and victim impact to create a letter of apology to show that there is a strong, rather than I'm sorry that I hurt you on so-and-so date, and you must have suffered a lot of pain and agony. And now I can jump to, let's talk all about me again. And that's really, I don't do that. Everybody else does it Joe's way. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I try to make that a point so people can really focus on that and really come at it from the point of the victim. Because my thing is, remorse is in the Title 15 factors, has a component of accountability. And the Title 15 factor says you express your crime in a manner in which conveys to the commissioners that you appreciate the nature and magnitude of what you've done. How can you do that? Can you make that with a statement saying, I am truly responsible for what I did on the day of the life crime? Nope, doesn't convey anything about the nature and magnitude of your crime. How do you convey the nature and magnitude? By saying what you did, as if you're giving the opening statement as the prosecutor in your trial. And that's the best way that I describe it to the clients that have that kind of cognitive function. They're able to really get that. I can explain it in other ways too, but we're not here to retry the case. You've been found guilty. Those findings are never going to change. So you can lay it out. Do you have to admit to things you didn't do? No, but that's a different topic. And that's a kind of a rare event. And then the next one is victim impact. So if you have that paragraph or paragraphs, depending on if you have a lot of crimes that make up your overall life crime, then you can go straight into victim impact and you can have an entire paragraph or paragraphs about victim impact. And also, I also advise my clients to do separate letters of apology, one remorse statement. So what's in the remorse statement? The remorse statement for me is your amends. How have you made this right? And so I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying make them separate. Make the letter of apology to the victim, the letter of apology to the victim. And that way, if they receive them, because I really learned this from my secretary who used to help me read letters. And she would just get turned off when she got letters of apology that talked nothing about, I'm sorry I killed you, but my childhood was bad and I've learned that it was bad and that affected my decisions that day. And I've done this and this and that to make it right. And I took all these classes in prison. I got my college degree. Your son is 6 feet under, but I went to college. And so I just decided based on her negative reactions to separate those. But again, the Restorative Justice Project does not do it that way. They say you should show the victim that the time your loved one's death or harm has not been in vain. So that was just me on a rant, his chapter basically, but this is this regardless of your philosophy or however it comes out, you will not be aggravated. You won't get an aggravated finding from the panel if you don't do it my way, but it can lead to some tricky language in there where DAs will criticize you for it and some other stuff may happen. So you just have to be really careful. Another thing that's important is bring those letters, have your loved one bring those letters with them to their meetings with the attorney so the attorney can look and judge them. Some attorneys are just going to kind of say, oh, that's great. You've got the letter. Great. Some attorneys, like I go through them. If you bring it, I'm going to go through it and I'm going to mark it up and I'm going to say, you didn't follow the instruction. Sometimes I'll give my client a pass if they've blended the letter, because like I said, most of the groups that the eligible parolees go to say to blend them and make it a restorative justice project. But that is that separate letters to each victim. And then you can have one global remorse statement as to how you've made it right and how you've made amends. But it's so important. Why is it important? Because Title 15 factors say it is. It's a factor of finding of suitability. It's also part of the structured decision-making framework, which is offender change, personal growth, and growth and maturity for youthful offender factors. And also, it's not just an intellectual exercise. It kind of is, because you don't give it to the victims, but it's a heartfelt expression of regret, sorrow, and repentance. And once again, that's kind of from the quote, I didn't quote from Joe's book, but he put one of his quotes in there, but it is important for your own personal growth and healing, because it's part of the forgiveness process. It's part of the acknowledgement process. It's part of the accountability process. And it's also can help you with the self-discovery process, force you to really look at your crime, really look at victim impact. You can't do any of that also without the work required. You need to attend victim impact. You need to attend victim awareness classes to help. Who are my victims? How did I impact them? You need to attend, denial management for the language that you need to use. You need to learn empathy. Okay. You need to have empathy. If you don't have empathy, most people would consider you to be either narcissistic or still suffering from antisocial personality disorder, both of which say that a lack of empathy and an inability to have empathy is a trait of a psychopath. And that's basically like our political leaders and everybody else that decided that they're going to be the ruling class over the rest of us, the slaves. But anyway, moving on from that negative, I'm going to say, you can really show really good letters of apology and or remorse statements can really show how you've rehabilitated and changed. Because if you think of those if you think of those assignments, you've been able to show that you're accountable. You've been able to show that you don't minimize. You've been able to show that you're aware of who your victims are. You're able to show the impact. So that means you must have taken some classes. You're able to show your amends. That's a 12-step thing. You're able to show the groups you've taken, the growth you've made. It's such a powerful, for lack of a better word, tool or component of your parole packet. I think in some ways that and the relapse prevention plan for me is what I tell my clients to always include in their parole packet. And it's really the only thing, because you can take out then you don't need an insight statement because it's already incorporated into relapse prevention planning. You don't need a separate insight statement. The insight statement's just a prerequisite to figuring out, okay, well, what do I need to prevent in the future as far as that? And then also the letter of apologies and remorse statements can help show the commissioner. It's a nice exhibit for them to go, he must have done the work, because you wouldn't have been able to make this letter of apology as good as it is if you didn't do the work. And so that's just an overview of the chapter. There's a lot more in this chapter, and Joe's chapters are great. They're just a few pages, but there's so much meat in each one of them for somebody to really take this book and really work through it, like over the course of most of the majority of a year, right? Because most of the chapters require, a good amount of thinking about it. All these chapters, like you probably need about 36 weeks to work through this book to be ready, at least for the parole hearing. Although this 36 chapters really is it's a 10-year project for most. And, Mike's smiling because he knows it's true. You can't just go, I want to change, and then I'm changed. It's like, nope. Now he's like he said, now the hard work begins, and the pain, sometimes painful, because you can't rely on your old coping strategies to get past that. So I've rambled on. Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you. There's a lot in this chapter. He's given you questions. He's given you tips on how to approach it. He's given you a ton of stuff to think about. So all you, Joe.
Sure. Well, you said a lot there, and it's not just a matter of sitting down and saying I'm sorry. It begins with exploring the crime, what you did, understanding the nature and the magnitude of it. And you're really not ready for writing it until you've done some of that work. And obviously the worst reason to write a letter of remorse is because you're hoping to be granted parole. That's not the right thinking. And I mean, like, writing the letter of remorse is not done in a vacuum. Like Elizabeth said, it's about understanding the harm on the victims, and not just at the time of the crime, but afterwards. It has obviously lingering effects of great trauma, emotional harm. I mean, use whatever words you want to describe it, but it's what's happened that's led you to a life imprisonment is obviously very serious. Now, having said that, there's some things you don't want to put in a letter of remorse, which maybe first drafts or first time letter of remorse authors, if you will, don't list your participation in self-help groups and, like Elizabeth said, taking college, and don't explain your own personal traumatic social history prior to the life crime. Don't ask for forgiveness. And it's up to the victim, and only to the victim, to express whether or not they want to forgive you. It's totally voluntary on their part.
That's really critical to mention that, because I just had a client, man, the panel was so offended when in that letter asking for forgiveness. They just didn't get it. And so it showed that they did get it. They didn't really listen during victim impact classes and things like that. And I know it's part of restorative justice, but again, that restorative justice thing, I don't know. It comes back to bite my clients more than it helps them. And so you have to be so careful about that. You know, again, if you want to ask for forgiveness, or you want to seek forgiveness or hope that they forgive you one day, put it in a remorse statement. Leave it out of the letter to the victim. That's why, again, it's so nice to separate those letters. But good point, really good point,
Absolutely.
Joe.
Sure. And just remember, the victims don't owe you a damn thing. So whatever they decide to do, it's all of their choice, 100%. Also, too, don't express and say, "Oh, I know how you must feel." No, come on, you don't know how they feel.
Yeah.
However, that's not to say you're not gonna try and put yourself in their shoes and see it from their point of view. But those feelings, you know, down to their heart, deep inside their heart, the victim's next of kin, you know, they had their own personal connection to the victim, and you don't know what that was or how deep it went. You can only try to put yourself in their shoes and maybe compare it to a time when you yourself had a loss, and I think that's a good start. Having, you know, because we're all human beings on this earth, we all have our peaks and valleys of emotions, and we've all had our personal experience with loss. So that's a start to looking back to the harm you caused and the feelings of the victims. Now, having said all that, there's no clear template for a letter of remorse. Meaning, you know, it's not like a recipe where you can say this at the beginning, the middle, and the end. It should be very personal, where, you know, you focus on expressions of empathy for your victim and the loved ones. You accept responsibility. You know, what do you want to say to them about it that maybe during your sentencing you wanted to say but you couldn't? Or maybe how is that developed over time, where you know, you've looked into it further? Sometimes people have no expression of empathy at the time of the crime because they didn't, quite frankly, they didn't have their mind to do that. Anyways, these are all things to think about, and there's no easy way. You don't like write a first draft and, hey, this is it. No, it'll change over time. Maybe 2 or 3 years from now, you'll rewrite it based on different insights you've had, different things you've learned in victim impact, different experiences with victims coming to the prison and talking about their experiences of being on the receiving end of crimes and all the harm and the trauma that it's caused them. So a letter of remorse is not easy, but it's part of the rehabilitation process. Also, too, it's more for the incarcerated person rather than the victim, because most of these victims or victims next of kin are never going to read it. So it's also a therapeutic exercise for yourself and about unburdening the weight you've been carrying around for so long. It's never going to completely remove that, but certainly the therapeutic value it has will help assist in maybe lightening that burden. So those are some of the key things about the letter of remorse. Michael, you seem like you're chomping at the bit to talk. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
If I may,
Well,
Elizabeth, I don't want to take away that power from you. You ultimately hold that authority, but
No, you have the authority all over me.
no.
Mm-hmm.
all right. So, the very first thing I want to say about writing a letter of remorse, it's not going to just be one letter, even if it's just one victim that you're writing it to. The first one that I wrote, I was still sitting in my jail cell waiting to go to my hearings. While I was still going through the entire court process, just months after I was arrested. The gravity of what I had done had hit me, and I just had to put it on paper. And I carried that letter with me. In fact, I've still got it in my stack of paperwork today. And I use it as a tool and a remembrance. And I say I use it as a tool because I look at where I was then. And when I wrote that letter, I had talked about how I just didn't understand how I could do what I had done. I didn't mean to kill the man. All these things that show true lack of insight, true lack of integrity, true lack of wisdom. And over the years, I've written this letter I have sitting in front of me right here, the one that the board saw the very last time. Written that letter probably 30 times. But each evolution of that letter was after I had gained another step in my insight. And looking through them, I could actually see the growth of everything that I had done, all the lessons that I had learned, all of the work that I went through, all the accountability that I finally stepped forward to. And even this final letter, once I got the meat of it the way that spoke to me, there were still things in it that I had to go back and rewrite because they just didn't say what my heart needed them to say. And before I gave the final packet in and Elizabeth had the 10-day packet, I'd probably rewritten this one half a dozen times. And this isn't going to be an easy project. This is probably going to be one of the hardest single projects as lifers that we do. Because if we're going to write a letter of remorse, then we have to fully embrace accountability. We have to fully understand empathy. And that's a spot where a lot of people have trouble, is empathy. A lot of people say, oh yeah, well, I feel bad for what I did to my victims and their families. And that's not empathy. A lot of people confuse empathy and sympathy. And I'll give it to you in just a brief little nutshell here. When you have sympathy and say, oh, I feel sorry for that guy. He fell down the stairs. That's an emotional disconnect. Saying, oh yeah, I feel bad for him, but you know what? I'm going to go on with my life, do whatever. That affects me none. That's sympathy. Empathy is an emotional connection. Same guy walking down, falls down the stairs. Oh crap, that guy fell down the stairs. Oh, that had to hurt. Let me go help him. Let me see what I can do. Let's get some emotional involvement here. And that's the big difference between sympathy and empathy. And that's the first thing we have to understand before we even get to remorse. Because without a functioning understanding of what empathy really is, How can we embrace the guilt and the shame and the accountability that comes with remorse? Because it's all founded in empathy. It's that ability to feel the pain of our victims. And once I got to that point and actually understood that, I don't want to say this letter was easy to write because it wasn't. But it was easier for me to let the words come from my heart because there was nothing there standing in the way. The roadblock wasn't there. That sympathy was not there. It was the empathy guiding forth the emotion. And the next big thing I want to tell everybody is when you're doing your remorse letters, I don't know how many times I've sat down with a lifer and helped them with their drafts of their remorse letter. And started off on this day, I killed so and so, and it just runs on and on and on. You know, that's not remorse. You're just stating facts. When you write your remorse letter, the best piece of advice I can give you is make it personal. Make it first person. You're talking to the person that you're showing remorse to. I mean, when I wrote my letter to my victim, this one, you know, I mean, the very first part of it is I sat down and I acknowledged, as of writing this letter, it's been 25 years, 3 weeks, 2 days since I murdered you. And every day I remember your face. That that made it so personal to me that the rest of that letter, I was able to focus on the things that I had stolen from Craig. All those precious moments, all those moments with his family, all the things and potential that he would never achieve. I was able to, through that, acknowledge the bravery he demonstrated during the Gulf War when he went and fought for our country. He fought for freedom. It helped me, bring to light that I understood and that I felt the pain for the loss that his family suffered because of what I'd done, because I'd taken him from them. And that was the biggest part of my letter. Yeah, there's a section in there where I talk about accountability and address the fact, like I told you earlier, that when this first happened, I claimed not to know how I'd gotten here, how I could actually have killed a man. I addressed that in about a paragraph and explained that not because of my past, but because of the choices I made, because of the choices to succumb to my anger and my addiction, and the choices I made to be impulsive and irrational. I didn't lay blame on anybody except me because that's where the blame lies. I'm the one that made the choices. And I explained that in just a paragraph. And then towards the end of the letter, I talked a little bit about some of the things I learned in recovery about how my actions created victims and the things that it did to his family and to the people who loved him in the community. And not as a lecture of just spouting self-help, but actually digging into what I had taken from him. It wasn't about my journey in recovery. It was just about the fact that I recognize these are the things that I took from him and his family and the victims I created. And then at the very end of the letter, I just gave a deep, heartfelt apology and recognizing the fact that no matter what I say, my words will never be enough. There's no way to ever say, I'm sorry for killing you and make it enough. I'm sorry for killing your son, your daughter, your brother, and it be ever enough. But the sheer fact that we put the words out there and we mean them, we put that energy out there to the universe to hopefully help start some kind of healing. And, you know, in the end of this, none of this was about me. Yeah, I addressed a couple of small issues that I wanted everybody to understand. This is why, and this is how I addressed it. But it was so very small as to that. There's just not enough we can say in these letters to ever make a dent in the pain we caused. I don't care if you've taken a life. I don't care if, you're going to board on a 3 strikes case where you never killed anybody and you've created victims. There is nothing we can do or say that will ever be enough. So all we can do is speak from the heart, speak truthfully, show that we understand the harm we've caused, the damage we've done, and make this about understanding our victims and let them know that we understand their pain. That even though there's no way we can experience firsthand what they're going through, we are trying to live it with them, and we feel it simply because it's part of our lives too. And always make this letter personal. Always. I can't emphasize that enough because you're not talking to the board in this letter. You're not talking to some faceless entity out there. You're talking to your victims. And your victims deserve that dignity and that respect of you addressing them and you being personal with these letters. This was probably the single hardest thing I had to do getting ready for board. And this, like I said, the first letter I wrote was decades ago. But the first letter I wrote, actually thinking that I might have a chance to go to boards one day, was about 15 or 16 years ago. And that's the sole reason I wrote it that time. Oh, well, I'm going to go to board someday. So let me start working on this. Again, this isn't about the board. Yeah, the board's going to read these, and the board's going to put a lot of weight on these. But I beg you, when you write this, don't give a crap what the board is going to think. Honestly, put your honest to God remorse and empathy and truth behind it. Hold your true accountability and don't make excuses. Because they say in the end, truth will set you free. Whether you walk out the prison gates or not, if you do this and you do it with all your heart, you will already be free. Because this will take a large burden off of you. This letter serves so much more than just a tool for board. It's a tool for rebuilding your life and healing pain and putting that positivity and that understanding and insight and remorse and accountability out into the universe. And when we do that, we start making change, not in just ourselves, but in the world around us. When we put that kind of emotion out there with the intent of reconciling and healing and growth, the world around us can't help but respond and like. So I didn't just write one remorse letter either. I wrote one directly to my victim. And like I said, I talked to my victim as if he were sitting here right in front of me. Then I wrote one to his family. And again, I wrote it as if I was sitting right there with them, explaining myself and explaining the harm that I caused. But I didn't just explain the harm that I caused when I wrote my letter to them. I knew my victim personally. And one of the things that I felt so moved to share with them was not only the tragedy of what I'd done, but some of my deepest, fondest memories of their son, their brother, their uncle, of how he was, in spite of everything, a good man, and how at one point in my life before this happened, when he had seen me struggling, he tried to help me. And I wanted them to see that even though I was who I was, he was so kind and caring that he reached out and tried to help me. Our victims' families don't just need to see what they've lost. They know what they've lost. And yes, it's good that we acknowledge it. But it's also good to show them some of the kindness and some of the caring and some of the special qualities of their loved one. And the fact that it comes from such a damaged source, it's going to mean so much more were they ever to take the opportunity to read these letters. Because they will get to see the kindness of their loved one that maybe they would have never seen that particular side of them before. They may have had a different perspective. But to see it from somebody who'd been damaged and hurt all their life, that was such a destructive force in their loved one's life, and yet there's still positive memories there. It's mind-boggling when I looked at it. But it took such a great weight off my heart when I wrote that and let them understand. Yeah, like I said, these letters have to be personal. They can't just be some template out of a book. They can't be just, spewing rhetoric. We have to embrace our victims. We have to. And then, sorry, uh, then I took, and after I'd written that letter, I wrote basically a blanket victim impact letter and remorse letter to everybody else, all the victims known and unknown to me. And I went through and addressed each one of them, either by name or by group, because there's some people, like the first responders that I addressed. I looked at the damage I'd caused in their lives because they had to be traumatized by the scene they walked into. And these men and women have to undergo intense counseling just to keep from taking that stuff home with them every night. And just the possibility of such extended victimization just from them having to come in and do their job because of who I was and what I chose to do. And I didn't leave any stone unturned. I mean, I even addressed my damage that I'd done to my family. I addressed the damage I'd done to my community. I addressed the damage that I had done to the children down in El Salvador that he was sponsoring, that they had lost their sponsor. And God only knows how that affected their lives down there. The effects of what I did weren't just one person. They weren't just local. They weren't just the state of California. They reached over the whole damn world. And these words are never going to be enough. But we have to say them. And we have to say them honestly. We have to say them compassionately. We have to say them with empathy. We have to say them with accountability. And we have to let our true remorse show through. I mean, I could sit here and talk about this all day long, but the bottom line is just be honest. And that's it.
Yeah, honesty. You have to work on most of my clients need to work on their honesty a little bit before they can really get down to it. So 11 o'clock, I promised to cut Joe loose here. I just wanted to ask you guys, starting August 11th, I'm participating in a masterclass for the Course in Miracles. It's starting at 10:30. Would you guys be available at 9 o'clock on Sundays?
Yeah, I'd be able to do that.
Joe is trickier because I don't know if he wants to get up that early on a Sunday. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I was just trying to decompress after that awesome take on remorse letters by Michael.
Yeah, another one out of the park here.
Yeah, and yeah, you know, I'll try to make it happen at 9. Okay.
Oh, okay. I mean, if it's a problem, we could
No,
do
don't worry.
9:30.
It's okay.
Okay. They have another option available on Thursdays, but it's midday, and there's just no way I could be. There's no way I could make that happen, as you know.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I work on Thursdays, so.
Yeah. So I mean, that's the thing. I can't do it Thursdays. I mean, the class had the option for Thursdays, but it's midday, and Joe and I are in interviews and there's no way I could book that off. So that would be great. 9 o'clock, and then we could all get on with our day even earlier.
Yeah,
Instead
come
of
on, 7 o'clock,
midday.
6 o'clock. Just let me know.
7 o'clock. I know you're not going to do 7. I know you're not going to do 7. Let's be honest. Let's be honest. Thanks again for you guys coming on. Please, if anybody is watching the show, share it with anybody you think would receive valuable information from this. And please comment below if you do have questions or comments. We would love to have comments and questions to share amongst ourselves and talk amongst ourselves. So we'll see you next week. Oh, and the next chapter after remorse, Joe, do you remember?
Sure.
You do?
Yeah, it's chapter 14, UFOs and suitability, reverse engineering your way to suitability.
Oh my God, I love that. Love that. This is going to be great. This is going to be great. Okay. I'll see you guys next week, and thank you for coming, and really good stuff on this chapter. Another just jam-packed chapter, really. And hope you're taking notes, Joe, for your new book.
Yes.
And we'll see you guys in a minute.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
Alrighty.